Welcome to Holistic Health for Happy Kids, the podcast where we dive into the root causes of children's health challenges and explore natural solutions to help little ones thrive. I'm Lisa, a passionate paediatric naturopath and mum of 3, dedicated to empowering parents with practical tips and expert insights to raise healthy, happy kids. Each episode will unpack common childhood health concerns like allergies, eczema, fussy eating, and gut health, and share evidence-based advice to support your child's wellness naturally. Let's create a generation of thriving children, one holistic step at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Hello and welcome to this episode, which is called Growing Up Healthy, a Girl's Guide to Urinary and Vaginal Health. And today I'm joined by naturopath Kelly. So Kelly, tell me a bit about yourself and how did you become a naturopath?
Okay, yep. So I am a mum of 3 teenage sons, and like many naturopaths, I've always had an interest in health and wellness, but it was through my own experiences and the experiences I had with my kids that led me to eventually become a naturopath so I could help others. So for myself, I had really irregular periods in my teens and 20s and was diagnosed with dysfunctional uterine bleeding, which is one of those really fun diagnoses like IBS and unexplained infertility, where basically they just have no idea. And I was put on the pill to regulate my hormones and sent on my way. That was a disaster, and ultimately I ended up having some fertility issues, no surprise, and ultimately was diagnosed with PCOS and insulin resistance, probably a good 10 to 15 years later. So that made me really passionate about, looking into things deeper, finding the root cause and all of those things. But ultimately what pushed me to actually leave my career in investment banking was my experience with my middle son. So he was a screaming baby diagnosed with silent reflux, and they put him on a PPI medication from when he was 4 weeks old. And we were told he'd need to be on it for about 4 weeks, but he was on it until he was 10 months old. And it worked amazingly. He became an angelic little cherub. He slept, he stopped screaming. It was great. And then at about age 3, he started to display really severe sensory processing issues. So he couldn't go into public toilets if there was a hand dryer. He wouldn't go into birthday parties. Having a haircut was just extreme meltdowns, and it got more and more severe over time. His sleep deteriorated, and I remember one night counting, he woke me up about 23 times, having always been a really good sleeper. So at the advice of my mum, I took him to see a naturopath rather than have him assessed for autism like I was recommended to do. We first removed gluten, and it was like taking crack off a crack addict. I will not lie, it was 6 weeks of hell. And that's where I first learned about the opioid response of foods like gluten in some kids. Yeah, 6 weeks of hell, and after that, it was like a light switch. He was a completely different kid. And as you know, Lisa, we see stuff like that all the time.
It's pretty much a perfect example of the kids that we see. And yeah, I had the same experience with one of my children when I took off gluten. It was like flicking a switch where I felt like I'd given her Valium. It was like amazing, but not discussed. Nobody will ever, no doctor will ever say, oh, your kid's having meltdowns and no regulation. Let's try removing gluten, because it's so easy. Like difficult as in it's a drug to them, but easy as in it's a miracle.
Yeah, and we did so many things for him. Like we worked on his gut health, we worked on nutrient deficiencies that had no doubt been made worse by his 10 months on a PPI as a baby. And we did all of the things, but actually those first 6 weeks of removing gluten was unbelievable. And so I, like many mums, went down rabbit holes, couldn't believe that nobody was talking about this. And yeah, left my career in investment banking and retrained because the difference in our family's life was unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's great because then the husbands see with their own eyes the changes that can be made. So you're not pushing water uphill all the time. Like you might have to make the first move to get gluten out of your kids' diet, but once the husbands see the benefit, you can get everybody on board pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And proton pump inhibitors, yeah, I mean, we see kids who have been on that for years, and the consequences are dramatic to their gut health. But today, we're not going to be talking about any of that. We're going to be talking about girl bits, because this is not an area that I have worked in much. And it was only really when you joined the team that everybody started to come out of the woodwork and talking about a lot of these issues. So tell me about some of the sort of the girl bit issues that you commonly see in clinic.
Yeah, gosh, so many. So I see lots of vulvovaginitis, right? So inflammation of the vagina and or the vulva. So the vulva being the external tissue and what we commonly mistakenly call the vagina. So inflamed red sore vulvas. And I do use the term vagina and vulva intermittently, but if we're being correct, that is the vulva and not the vagina. But yeah, so this vulvovaginitis can present with a lot of different symptoms like itching, redness, discharge, discomfort. It can be from so many different issues, from like just literally wiping the wrong way, not wiping from front to back. If there's any urinary incontinence, you can get pooled urine, or even in nappies and things like that, that can cause problems. What blew my mind and is bizarrely common, foreign bodies being inserted. So just like we put marbles up the nose, we can have crayons in the vagina as well. Being a naturopath, you see so many things that you just never thought you would when you were studying. Bacterial imbalances, so dysbiosis, what similar to the gut microbiome, the vaginal microbiome. Vaginal pinworms, another thing that I did not know I would see so much of.
Yeah, so I mean, it's crazy to say it, but we see a lot of this issue. So tell me, what's the connection between threadworms / pinworms and vulvovaginitis? Like, what's going on there?
So the reason that you would get the vaginal pinworms is because when the female pinworms come out and lay their eggs near the anus area at nighttime, that causes that itching that we all sort of commonly know about when we have worms. These same female pinworms can and do migrate from the anus to the vagina.
Yeah.
And in the same way that they cause itchy bottoms, they will cause an itchy vulva. They basically trigger an immune response, which causes the inflammation and redness and all of those things. And then what often happens as well is you get secondary irritation from scratching, and bacteria can be introduced, and it can actually become a lot more complex than just the worms themselves.
And again, it's not something that you ever would go to the GP and say that your child has vulvovaginitis, and you would have this discussion about the little march of the threadworms overnight.
Worse than that, I had a client very recently who had just paid $700 for a paediatrician appointment because she had found vaginal pinworms, and the paediatrician told her it was not a thing.
Oh, wow. Obviously doesn't do much research.
No.
So what do you do about it?
Okay, so it is a little bit tricky in that the OTC treatments that we get from the chemist that work really, really well for your normal sort of itchy bum worms, they don't work outside of the gastrointestinal tract. And so it's a lot more difficult to treat these. We do obviously all the recommendations that we would recommend for normal pinworms, keeping nails short, washing hands, washing bedding, all of the things. But for the vaginal worms, you want to apply a barrier cream at night quite thickly so that anything cannot migrate. And that also works really nicely to soothe the area as well. But yeah, annoyingly, what you really need to do is after the kids have been asleep for about 2 hours, you need to wake them up, have a good look, and remove them with tweezers, which is the best way. We also recommend things like apple cider garlic sitz baths as sort of like anti-worm treatment as well. But removing them with tweezers is a really hard.
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of research into threadworms last year, and this actually came up in the research that if you physically remove them every day for a few weeks, you can get rid of them. But gee, nobody signs up to do that with their children, do they? And I have got a whole other episode just about threadworms, which is focused on how to treat them in the gut. So if this is a recurring problem for your family, definitely check out that episode.
Can I just add there as well, game changer for that, which I know you have another episode about, having a shower first thing in the morning when you wake up is the game changer lifestyle recommendation for me for getting rid of recurrent pinworms. It has been the number one thing that a lot of parents haven't been doing, because they've done all the other lifestyle things they're recommended, and that morning shower really stops, because it's under the fingernails and scratching, and then they put their fingers in their mouths again and it just happens all over again.
So just a normal shower?
Normal shower. First thing in the morning when you wake up, or when your child wakes up. Game changer.
Stick them in the shower.
Yeah.
And so I often hear people saying that their like little girls have thrush, but you're the expert here. But as far as I know, prepubescent girls won't really get thrush that much, and usually it is something else. So is that right, or what's your take on that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's not just kids that have all their vaginal issues labelled as thrush either. It happens with adults all the time too. But pre-puberty and post-puberty, the vaginal microbiomes are really, really different. As our hormone profiles change, the vaginal microbiome shifts, and the type of infections we see also change. So generally speaking, in low estrogen states, which is post-menopause and pre-puberty, thrush is rare. So it's estrogen that creates a glycogen-rich environment where the candida thrives. So in kids under 2, still in nappies, thrush is more common. So from birth, for the first 8 weeks or so of life, Bub's actually under the influence of the maternal estrogens. So anyone who's had a baby girl may have noticed that the labia can be quite swollen when they're born, and there might be a white or clear discharge, and sometimes that's even tinged with blood as a response to the withdrawal of maternal estrogen. So it's a bit like a pseudo period. During that time, absolutely babies can have thrush. And also anyone in nappies, just because of the environment, thrush may be a role. But other than that, you're right. It's rare for thrush to be the issue.
So then from the age of 2 up until puberty, it's rare?
Out of nappies. So if you're in nappies for an extended period of time, obviously it could still be thrush.
And you mentioned the vaginal microbiome. So how do we assess that?
In kids, we often don't do testing. If we're going to assess it at all, we certainly don't do any vaginal testing intravaginally and do any insertion of anything in a young child, but we may send them to the GP just to have a vulva swab. And it's actually very rare that I would do a full vaginal microbiome test, the comprehensive ones we use for adults. Having said that, I have recommended them for some children when it's been persistent and we haven't been able to get to the bottom of it. I would normally use a gut microbiome test first, because there's often bacteria in the stool that are being wiped forward to the vagina that are the cause of the problem.
Yeah. And so what sort of things would you normally do if a child comes in with vulvovaginitis? That is hard to say. And it's not worms. Like what would you do?
Honestly, naturopaths are so well placed to deal with vulval issues of all kinds, adults, kids, because it does really require a holistic approach because there's so many different factors. So we might look at diet, we're looking at lifestyle, we've got appropriate herbs and nutrients because you're thinking about things like constipation, supporting the immune system, reducing inflammation, tissue healing, all of that sort of thing. So we have bespoke creams we can make up, sitz baths, oral tinctures. We're supporting the whole person, not just the diagnosis.
Yeah, not just the symptoms. So you mentioned obviously the lifestyle tip of a shower in the morning being a bit of a game changer. What are the other big sort of lifestyle tips that you think are really important?
Yep, so my top 2, the importance of teaching girls to wipe from front to back is really, really important. And also that the vulva is self-cleaning. Water is more than enough, avoiding irritants like soaps and bubble baths and things like that. You don't need them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because obviously companies try and sell these products and then kind of prey on people's fear around these things. But yeah, you just need water and that's it. Just wipe. What about things like, staying in your swimmers all day after going to the beach?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another one. Getting out of wet togs for teenagers more so than little kids, but getting out of your sweaty active wear, all of those sorts of things, breathable fabrics.
Yeah, so like breathable undies, like bamboo, things like that.
And even for little kids with recurrent, extended periods of time with no undies on.
Ah,
yeah.
That's fun.
Not out in public.
Yeah. So So then that's the sort of the vulval vagina side of things. Then what about urinary issues? So what's normal and what's not when it comes to urinary issues?
Yeah, some kids take a bit longer to develop bladder control. So daytime accidents can be normal for some kids until age 4. Nighttime accidents may be normal until about age 5. But beyond that, I would say further investigation is definitely warranted. Any pain with urination, persistent, frequent nighttime urination, leakage and incontinence becomes quite common. Any strong odor or color to the urine, and really importantly, any regression. So if they were dry before and then they start having accidents, things like that.
So what would you be thinking of if a child was dry and that all of a sudden they're wetting themselves?
It can be a lot of things, right? So you might just think it's a UTI, which would probably be a very common thing, but psychosocial stuff starts to play a role as well in those sorts of things that are going on. It can be quite broad, the reasons why people start nighttime wetting again.
Yeah. So tell me about the link with constipation and incontinence. What's going on there?
Yeah, so if you are constipated, obviously there can be pressure on the bladder that can cause significant issues there with urinary incontinence.
Yeah. So UTIs, obviously, if you think your daughter has a UTI, you go to the GP and ideally they will take a sample before prescribing antibiotics, but often they won't. And often kids will just end up taking antibiotic after antibiotic after antibiotic. Do you see any common themes for girls who are experiencing recurrent UTIs or even are being treated for recurrent UTIs, even if it's not actually?
Yeah, so this is a pretty big question as well. So most commonly it's E. coli that causes UTIs, and that is what doctors will assume. But we see time and time again it's actually not E. coli. So the antibiotic might be wrong, and even the natural treatments that we use for E. coli UTIs, like cranberry and D-mannose, don't work on other bacteria. So having that information about which bacteria it is really important. So that would obviously play a role in recurrent UTIs because you've just got the wrong treatment. You're never getting rid of that bacteria. But there's lots of other reasons as well. Chronic constipation is a big one with recurrent UTIs. Kids who aren't drinking enough fluid, the wiping technique that we talked about before, and even bubble baths and irritants can cause irritation that may cause recurrent UTIs. Kids who don't like going to the toilet at school and avoid going in a holding, that can be a big contributor. The wet swimsuits that we talked about before, the tight clothing, that just from a bacterial perspective can cause recurrent UTIs. And that situation you talked about before, where you're getting this repeated antibiotics, we get further perpetuation of the dysbiosis in both the urinary tract and the gut microbiome. And so that will play a role. And even things like kids who are run down and getting repeated infections of any kind, just their immune system's had a bit of a battering, that will impact repeated infection as well. And another situation that we do see fairly often is structural abnormalities that predispose kids to UTIs. So we obviously can't do a lot about that, but for those kids, making sure all the other factors are addressed is really important.
So do you mean things like kidney issues or any other structural?
Kidney, ureter, anything to do with that whole system for some kids can result in recurrent UTIs.
And what about hypermobility? Have you ever seen a link with hypermobile kids and UTIs?
Not specifically, because it's really hard to sort of get that direct link and diagnosis, but absolutely in the same way that we can get issues with the gastrointestinal tract and whole systemically with hypermobility, you can have issues with recurrent UTIs as well.
And is there much of I'm thinking of a few different families where both mother and daughter get recurrent UTIs, and even grandmother for this situation I'm thinking of. What do you think would be going on there that the whole family is getting UTIs?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, there could be a number of things, right? You would want to obviously dig deeper on a case-by-case basis, but it could be a structural abnormality that is genetic and is running through the family. Yeah, I mean, there could be a number of different things to look at there. Immune system things, nutrient deficiencies that often run within families because of, genetic predisposition.
And so what are some of the rarer conditions that you see that you think parents need to be aware of? Because it's just not something we talk about, at school pickup. So what are the things that you think parents need to maybe be more aware of?
Yeah, so this is actually really important. So vulval psoriasis and lichen sclerosis are conditions that I actually see more commonly than you would think. These are autoimmune conditions that, like other autoimmune conditions, can really benefit from our naturopathic approach. They can be pretty life impacting. They're experienced by adults, and the prevalence in kids is rare. But given my specialty in this area, I've been surprised by quite how many kids I see, both boys and girls, that experience these conditions. So in boys, lichen sclerosis is called BXO, so balanitis xerotica obliterans, and it involves the foreskin and the glans penis. And in boys and girls, lichens can actually impact the anus and perianal region as well. And it's really important to get to the correct diagnosis for these conditions. So quite often clients will come to us with the diagnosis already, looking for holistic support. But equally often they'll come just because of itching and discomfort that their child's experiencing. And then through our questioning and case taking and discussing more about the actual appearance of the vulva and what's going on, then we will refer them to a paediatric gynecologist or a dermatologist.
Because that's what I was going to say, who actually makes that diagnosis? So it can be either a gynecologist or a dermatologist.
Yes. Yeah.
But your first port of call, I guess, for a diagnosis would be with your GP anyway, and then they would point you to the appropriate person.
Yeah.
And so psoriasis, would children who have psoriasis elsewhere in their body be the children who have this issue as well, or it can be a standalone issue in the genital area?
A lot of the times I will see, so kids that the parents thought it was eczema, and then they'll get a vulval psoriasis diagnosis, and actually the eczema is deemed to be psoriasis as well. So you can have them together, but I do see a couple of clients where it is just in the vulva.
Yeah. And I suppose, because I'm thinking I have something called discoid lupus on my scalp, which I was told was psoriasis for years until they did a biopsy and they punched a bit out and looked at it under a microscope.
Yeah.
So I guess they actually need to have a biopsy to see what it is for sure.
They do, potentially. So a lot of adults will get the biopsies. Kids, they tend not to do that. Conventional treatment is to use steroids and not do anything too invasive.
Yeah.
You don't always need the biopsy for the diagnosis, but obviously it is quite common to do that as well.
Yeah, the biopsy on my scalp was absolutely horrendous. So I definitely wouldn't recommend it.
I don't know any kids who have had the biopsy on the vulva.
And so what about eczema? Can it go onto your vulva as well?
You can have allergic contact dermatitis, all of those conditions you can have on the vulva as well.
Yeah. So this has been awesome because it is an area that I don't really work in that much, and I definitely defer to you. Is there anything else that we haven't discussed that you think is important to talk about?
No, that's pretty much it. But also, I guess, just, taking these situations seriously. A lot of the times, particularly when there's these rarer conditions involved, labial fusing is actually quite common, and parents often don't do much about it. And that is actually commonly with lichen sclerosis. So you definitely need to look into these things. And just recognising that having a bit of itching and discomfort can be something a little bit more serious and is not necessarily just going to go away on its own.
Yes, awesome. Thank you very much. So if your daughter is struggling with any of these issues at all, don't be embarrassed. As you can tell, Kelly has heard it all before. So there was nothing that will shock her. So if you're having these issues, please jump on to the paediatricnaturopath.com.au and make an appointment with Kelly, and she can help you with all of these lovely issues. So thank you very much, Kelly, for joining me today. And we will talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in to Holistic Health for Happy Kids. I hope you found today's episode helpful and inspiring on your journey to raise thriving, healthy little ones. Remember, small, consistent changes can lead to big transformations. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other parents who might benefit. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at the Paediatric Naturopath for more tips, tools, and inspiration. If you've got a question or a topic you'd love to hear about, please send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care, and keep supporting your kids in the most natural, nurturing ways possible.